I'm delighted to be joined by Blake Allison, founder and CEO of LifeCents in Washington, D.C., a firm working with major US employers, financial institutions to improve financial well-being and resilience. Welcome, Blake.
Good to be here.
Thank you. So let's just start with the basics. So, firstly, what does financial well-being mean in your world? And how does LifeCents help organizations put that into practice?
Yeah, so by way of background, just to give a perspective, I started the business 20 years ago, and I think that definition has evolved over time, where I think in what we would say is generation one of financial well-being, it was mostly just about providing people with information, content that was relevant to their personal finances. And I think where we are now, things have evolved from people getting businesses, doing things like providing nudges and apps and a whole ecosystem of resources. But ultimately, what we're all trying to do is we're trying to help people become resilient. We're trying to help people become in control of their finances, but also be very much aware of where they are now, where they're headed, and understand that ecosystem of resources that they're able to access to achieve their goals. So it's not just about information, it's not just about action, but it's actually combining those to help people actually take action and connect with resources, whether that's benefits that are available to them, products, services, and then also, very often coaches, counselors, advisors, so the one-on-one help. So it's really kind of looking at this from a primary care physician perspective, or primary care physician for financial health.
So I think I wanted to bring it right back down to the reality of money before we go further. One thing with institutional pension funds around the world is, we talk quite a lot about saving. We talk quite a lot about assets under management, the bigger figure. And I think sometimes we kind of forget about the individual that's a member. So you spent years looking at how people behave with money. What have you learned about saving, debt, and confidence?
Yeah, so we are very much focused on the behaviors behind money. So it's not the what, it's the why. So very often, and to your point, the focus has been on the numbers, the account balances, and that's super important. But understanding why someone is saving or not saving, what are the life events that are driving decisions? What decisions are they making? What are the stressors? What keeps people up at night? All the human elements of money are really what we focus on. And I think that's where, as people better understand their circumstances, they're aware of their person and their situation, they're going to be more inclined to do the things that they need to do. So we all know that if we spent less and saved more, you and I might not be having this conversation right now, unfortunately, but it's not that easy. Human behavior just gets in the way. And so we have to work in that context of just meeting people. It's very cliche, but meeting people where they are, but treating people as people and not as numbers.
We had quite an interesting conversation when you first got off the plane, talking about how just in general, under 35s perhaps, have an outlook on environmental and long-term issues, but the reality is actually quite different. And although statistics might say that under 35s want to save the planet, that's pretty hard when you're trying to get on the property ladder. And I'd just love to get your view on some of those biases around demographics.
Yeah, and so we had a great conversation. I'm a little less jet lagged for sure, and cleaned up a little bit better. Yeah, so I think there is certainly that younger audience is much more passionate about these issues of sustainability, but I think there needs to be a balance where they also need to be self-sustainable, and so I think what we talked about, the very key. If I'm worried about my finances day to day, it is very hard for me to think about the impact down the road. But I think what's happening is that equation's being flipped, where there's too much focus sometimes on the sustainability and looking down the road, trying to save the world, and not understanding that if you don't take care of yourself now, that is going to have really negative impacts on your life. 5, 10, 15, 20 years down later in life. And I think that's something, it's very hard because you don't want to stem that passion, but you also, I think it's very important to help people do what they need to do to get where they need to be. And so they can do more. I mean, I think that's the other thing too. I often use the analogy with Bill Gates, global figure, and Bill Gates is known for his philanthropy. Would it have been better for Bill Gates to incrementally um, do things philanthropically when he had less money, or now later in life where he has billions of dollars that he can commit? Again, it's kind of an extreme example, but I do think it's helpful where it's like if we can take care of ourselves, we're going to be in a much better position to take care of others.
Yeah, and again, I guess at the other end of the spectrum, you've got people that are looking to cash out. They're looking to go into retirement. Do you see any behavioural aspects at maybe with over 55s, if we're putting a sort of number on it, with their behaviours?
In terms of sustainability or just generally?
In terms of their attitude, I think towards sustainability, but also they're obviously not saving so much anymore. They are looking to probably manage that pot that they have built up.
I think I think anyone in that situation is very fortunate. I think what we're finding is people are not in the position to retire when they're 55 or think about it. And so that is actually a trend that's very concerning, which people are wholly unprepared for retirement. And so people are having to extend their careers working or the time they're working. And so as people have that awareness of where they are and see that they're not going to have the lifestyle that they thought they were going to have in retirement, they're like, oh no, and they continue working. And then on the flip side, a lot of people are forced out of work not because they want to, but because they have to because of health issues and things like that. So there are a lot of forces that are coming into play that. I think, again, this is the importance of helping people prepare and understand where they are, because it's one thing to have these aspirations and have this vision of what you want your retirement to look like. But if you're not doing the things now that are going to get you there, there's a huge disconnect. And I think that's affecting a lot of people right now.
And I mean, we touched briefly on the sustainability aspect. I mean, do you think that is a factor for people? Members of institutional pension funds. Do you think they really mind where their money's going, or are they looking at what the return is?
$1 million question. We had a very good conversation the other day about this, and I think it. Not to give a non-answer, but I think it depends. I mean, there's certainly that under 35 who is probably much more interested in where their money goes. But the question is, if they understood that, let's say, where there's research that supports that sustainable funds may not be giving the same kinds of returns as other funds, if they were aware of that, would they still make those same decisions? And I think that's where financial well-being comes into play, which is to help people understand the realities, help them make more informed decisions. Because it's one thing to make a decision out of passion, which is can be fantastic, but if it has real world implications down the line that you're not aware of, that can be very bad.
Because I think we kind of see through lots of different countries, asset owners in different countries doing things, radically different in some cases, some forced by legislation. Some, I think, is down to maybe perhaps the way in which things are communicated. So when we're looking at sustainability, I think some asset owners do a better job than others of explaining to members about long-term risk and why we need to invest in things like energy infrastructure.
Sure.
I think Canadian pension funds have notoriously done a great job of taking British assets, British utilities, and monetizing them. Do you think that is something that an individual, a member, would actually benefit from understanding?
I do, and I would put that under the umbrella of financial well-being. So from my very myopic lens of all things financial wellness and financial well-being, I think that is one of the roles of well-being programs, is to provide that education, to provide that insight, to help inform people, so they have the information to make informed decisions. And I think that is our goal. That is what we want to do, is make sure people can make informed decisions with all available information, for sure.
So do you think anybody's doing a good job of this right now? Is there anybody that you're seeing that's getting it right, or at least moving towards getting it right?
Yeah, so I think it's always interesting coming here to the UK and understanding, seeing what's going on from a well-being perspective and contrasting it or comparing that to what's going on in the U.S. I do think that in the U.S. There is a greater emphasis at the employer level of providing financial wellness or well-being programs, and so it's much more corporate. From a corporate culture perspective, I think it's more prevalent in the U.S. And then there are individual companies. I mean, certainly, I think all of our clients are great examples. And then, we do work with Wells Fargo, especially on the foundation side. It's one of the largest retail banks in the U.S. And I think they're doing a lot of great things from the foundation perspective. They're doing a lot of community initiatives, reaching audiences that are typically underserved. But also, as much as I can disclose, but what their vision for what they're doing for their employees and also their customers, I think is tremendous. And so I think they're a great example of wellness programs that are being implemented well, and a vision and a strategy on both sides, the foundation and on the corporate side, that are working very well.
Well, I mean, one of the things that is pretty obvious to me is that certainly from my experience, my lived experience of pension funds trying to get me to save more. It's almost like I'm being beaten with a big stick. Right. Just save more, save more.
Right.
How do you think they can? How do you think all of the asset owners watching this now should be looking at their strategy over the next 5 years to change people like me and my mindset?
Yeah. So. How long have we heard that message? We all need to save more. Don't take on debt, and it's the same rote message over and over. And I think that goes back to where I think right now we're in kind of Gen 3 of financial wellness and well-being. But whenever we talk about you need to save more, put more in your pension, it's like someone's pointing the finger at you, waving and say, shame on you. You need to save more. We know this. Most people know this. I think where the fund managers, and I'm sure they know this, but we have to do something. We have to do something different. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. And we have been trying to tell people to save more for decades. It's not working. So why is that? So is that the right message? It's the right message, but it's not being delivered the right way. And where we're finding success is, rather than saying you need to save more and I need to save more and someone else needs to save more, we're individuals, and there are reasons why each of us are not saving more. And the better we can do as an industry, and the fund managers can do to help understand who people are, understand the why behind the numbers, what's driving the reasons why you and I are not saving as much as we should. And I'm not saying you're not, but then you can establish a relationship. You establish a relationship, you build trust, and then when you have something to suggest, it's going to be much better received than I'm getting the same message as someone else, but I'm saying, well, you don't understand, I have too much medical debt, or someone else is saying another reason why they're not saving. If you acknowledge that, if you understand that, then the message can be delivered differently. And one of the other things that we're working on right now are using different types of archetypes and personas. So a great example is, rather than saying you're not saving enough, maybe say that you're an experience seeker. That persona of like, I like to go on trips, I like to go skydiving, whatever it may be. And using that to frame, well, you love these experiences, and it's probably taking up a little bit more money than it should, and that's taking away from your ability to save. So we appreciate that you're an experience seeker, but now let's turn that into, let's figure out how an experience seeker can save. So it's not saying you need to save more by saying, the same rote message over and over, but it's a much more personalized message. And I think from a communications perspective, from a marketing perspective, you can really get precise when you're using this data. And so you're not sending out generic messages, but you are really doing hyper-personalization. And I think that's the trend we're seeing as well in the US, is the focus on hyper-personalization.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, social media, especially, I guess, TikTok and Instagram has, derailed a lot of messaging, and actually where trust has probably gone away from financial institutions, certainly since 2008. We're now more likely to trust somebody that we have no idea who they are, but they feel like they're a little bit more relatable. Do you think there's a danger that, if we don't start adapting our strategies and techniques as asset owners, we're going to, be full of a world where people are seeking the wrong FOMO?
Yeah, well, so when you think about what people see on TikTok, it's always people living their best lives. You know, the fact that people are, you know, on TikTok, everyone's flying first class. They're going there. You see people on yachts in front of exotic cars and exotic locations, and then people watching that are like, well, I want that too. And so they're getting advice from people that it is not, you know, can it be trusted? You don't know, but people want to emulate that. And so if it's like, hey, I made my money by short selling stocks, or I made my money in this stock, or I made my money by, you know, being a fulfillment specialist on Amazon or whatever it may be, people are diving in and jumping into doing that. So there's a huge risk that people are going to follow bad advice or not be able to recognize bad advice. And again, I think that's one of the opportunities for financial well-being through employers and pension providers, et cetera, is to provide the well-being so people can understand what's real and what's not real. But there's also the risk that you know, from an industry perspective, from the well-being industry or retirement or pensions, what have you, is like, oh, well, people are watching TikTok, we need to do the same kind of thing. Well, the question is, are people actually, is that changing behavior, and is it changing behavior in the ways? And I know we can deliver better more trustworthy messages, but is more content the answer? And again, that takes us back to generation one. So now TikTok is just another form, and I'm not convinced that if someone comes out and say we're going to create a library of TikTok-like videos, that it's going to have the impact that we expect. It's just more content. I do think, though, if I were a financial services company, I would want to take the lead and become the trusted source of information that people are turning to. And so maybe there is going to be some library of short form video. I think there's an opportunity for longer form video content of people telling stories, where viewers can see that people have been in a similar situation. So I have too much debt and I've watched this long form video, someone sharing their story of how they were able to get out of that situation. So if I were a financial services company, I would want to be the one that's producing that content, not relying on people going to TikTok, for sure.
Do you think there's anybody, again, you know, that you can see that is starting to make waves with this?
So it's harder to put the finger on who's doing that. I mean, we certainly are involved in a lot of conversations in providing some guidance on this for some companies. But as an industry, the wellness industry in the U.S., there's a national conference, a financial health conference in the U.S., and the main theme this past year was about, you know, letting people tell their stories. And so I think from an industry perspective, I mean, that is the focus, and I think the execution implementation is forthcoming. But I wouldn't put my finger on any one example quite yet.
I mean, we couldn't have a US guest coming in without, you know, touching on geopolitical issues. How big an impact does, you know, politics play when it comes to, you know, trying to create a steady message for a population?
So I think that's one, you know, strength of financial wellness and financial well-being. It tends to be a non-political issue. It's not something that either side of the aisle is ever going to say, this is a bad idea. I think where wellness programs need to stay relevant is there's certainly a lot of changing policies, and you know, we have the big beautiful bill that has changed a lot of things related to personal finance. So I think it's our obligation from a wellness perspective is to make sure that the information that we're providing and the guidance that is being provided, not advice but guidance, is current and is helping to explain changes in policies and laws and things like that. So and again, I think that just reinforces the value of financial well-being as an employee benefit, as something that can be supported by businesses as they support initiatives in their communities and things like that. So I think it's just really the fluidity of these kinds of things really reinforces that there needs to be this constant, which can be this trusted program or initiative, which again goes back. I would want to be the financial services company that is that trusted source.
And I'm just coming back onto these shouldn't be politics shouldn't affect people wanting to save and having a better a retirement. But I think one of the things that we've seen, certainly from a sustainability lens, is there's been asset owners in the UK, also in the Nordics, that have removed asset managers because they haven't lived up to the promise. It hasn't fitted with the ethos of the fund. So we're talking quite a few £billion worth of assets under management have been removed. You've also then got the backdrop of probably for the last decade, people have been talking about ESG and, we need to be financially responsible for investing in projects that are going to help change the needle on long-term risk. Suddenly then we roll back on that. Do you think the fact that the asset owners and asset managers, because they're not necessarily explaining these changes, that has an impact on that trust?
Interesting. For sure. I mean, and specifically with ESG, the current administration, their ESG is not emphasized as it has been in past years. So there is tremendous change. And so I do think that the asset owners and the managers have a responsibility to provide that the insights and keep people current and help them understand implications. And again, I think generally speaking, though, the message should be stay the course, which is the goal is to get people to continue to save regularly. And I think that should be the priority. And then once people have established that habit, especially in defined contribution plans where it's up to the individual, that let's make sure we are getting people to save adequately, habitually. And then when that happens, I think then you start layering in more advanced concepts of let's think about how you allocate the money. But first and foremost, we need to get people saving.
I think you mentioned habit there. And one of the things that just instantly came to mind is I quite often see challenges for, I think 21 days to build a habit.
Yep.
What could we do to gamify some of this stuff, especially for younger people entering the workforce, to help reinforce that habit?
Yeah. So our product, LifeCents, both the company and the product, LifeCents as a product, we do use gamification. It's to take mundane or what seems to be mundane topics and make it more interesting. There's a lot that can be done, and I think it's not even gamification. I really think the success of programs like this relate to how they are implemented. So there are plenty of solutions, plenty of apps to help people with any aspect of their financial life. So again, we don't need more content necessarily. We don't need more apps necessarily. We need to get people using them. And part of that is how are they being implemented? How are they being made available to employees and participants and consumers? And then so are they being operationalized? So is the financial well-being program to encourage someone to save, how is that being integrated into operations? And one example, not quite the pension industry, but we're working with a credit union where they offer a debt consolidation product. And for their members who go through LifeCents, our platform, as they earn badges, they start off at a 19.99% interest rate. As they earn badges, they reduce that interest rate by a percentage point all the way down to a floor of 9.99%. So they have an incentive to learn, and they have an incentive to understand how money works, and they are being and then they are being rewarded for that. There are other examples. We're involved in a state 529 plan, which is a college savings program, where the state is funding, to some degree, providing some funds to a 529 plan. But one of the requirements is that they go through the financial education component of LifeCents. So I think we need to be creative in how we are implementing well-being programs, because we see that it is a catalyst for change.
Are there any benchmarks that you particularly, in a world where we love benchmarks in financial, is there anything, because a lot of this is non-tangible, right? Behaviours, they can't be just measured on a spreadsheet. So do you have any data measurement metrics that you particularly look out for to see if a program's working?
Yeah, so this is always the $1 million question, and it's always, it can be controversial because depending on who you talk to, there's going to be some different opinion, and I'll emphasize opinion on what outcome should be. What's the ROI? Very often, let's say an employee financial wellness program rolls up to the CFO. CFO is going to drum his or her fingers on the table and be like, "What's the bottom line, value to the business?" And I think that there are some what we call vanity metrics that are very hard to prove and demonstrate. Increases in productivity among employees, reductions in absenteeism and presenteeism, which all are fantastic outcomes, but they're very hard to measure. Most businesses are not set up to measure productivity of their employees, and even if they are, it's very hard to control for a single variable like financial wellness or well-being being the instrument that has made that change. So stepping back and looking at individuals and where are you now, and where are you trying to go, and what are the hurdles that you're trying to overcome? We have endless data showing how people have improved knowledge, how they have taken steps to reach their goals, how they have reached their goals. But we also, one of the key metrics that we look at are conversion rates. So I think financial well-being is conceptual until people take action. And the action that we want people to take is typically connecting them to products or services or people, like an advisor or counselor or coach. So we look at those conversion rates of someone who goes through our program, and it's like, oh, you know what, you would benefit by connecting with your, increasing the contribution to your 401k, or signing up for this employee benefit, or you really should talk to a coach. And there are a number of programs that we have where there's the high tech, high touch model, which we see is to be the most impactful, where we use the technology at scale to get to know people at scale, to personalize things at scale, and then provide the off ramp to coaches and counselors and advisors, and then with that. The same information that we have and we use to personalize the experience within LifeCents is something with permission can be handed over to one of those advisors or coaches or counselors, and now they have a much better understanding of who you are before you even walk in the door, and that is the key. And so that becomes much more scalable than trying to do one-on-one for everybody. But now you're doing you have one advisor or coach who can serve a lot more people because they're not spending the first 1, 2, or 3 sessions just trying to understand who you are.
Yeah.
Right.
And I guess, the more engaged you are, you should be messaging these people in an entirely different way to somebody that is not engaged.
Yeah, and that's where I think the type of data that's being used to message. So if we just look at historically demographic information and account balances, that's not really going to float anyone's boat. We've seen it for decades. As an industry, it's not moving the needle. So I think that's where looking at people as people, understanding who they are, building a relationship, building trust, and using that information in the messaging is where we see great success.
So I'm sure we're talking to quite a few converts here that are already on this message, that are probably struggling to get the hierarchy of their pension fund or insurance company to actually look at some of this stuff. So where should you start? Where is the starting point for an asset owner to start taking financial well-being seriously?
So very simply, a lot of times programs are implemented as a ready, fire, aim model where, like, okay, there's some urgency, we really should be doing this, or someone's asking for it, let's provide a financial well-being program and let's go, without any consideration to who they're trying to help. And so any given population of people, employees, consumers, customers, is going to be different. So where we always start is with a financial health assessment. And it's not a 10-question assessment. It's not 100 questions, but we're gamifying. We get very high throughput rates. But the idea is, let's first understand what the needs are. Let's understand what's going on. Then we can come back and make recommendations on what the program should be. What existing resources do you have as an organization, as a company, that can be brought into a program, but then put in front of people at the right time in the right way, versus just saying, "Here's look at all this great stuff we have for you. Now go figure it out." Most people don't understand. It's choice paralysis. That's where I think a lot of programs go wrong as well. Like, look, we have all this content, we have all these tools, we have these advisors, these people you can talk to, but from the individual perspective, we know, I mean, from a behavioral finance perspective, that you give people too many options, too many choices, and they choose nothing, and so they don't take action. A lot of what I've been talking about since being here this week has been about our role now as an industry is to be the orchestrator, which is how do we create a single entry point and a user experience that ties all of these resources that are already available. We don't need to recreate the wheel. Let's make sure we're getting value out of what's already been created. Of course, make sure it's what people need. But then what's that thread we can pull that brings these things together?
And finally, what gives you optimism about where this agenda is heading?
So I think there has been a resurgence over the past couple of years. There's been a tremendous resurgence in the interest of financial wellness programs, even some of the elements that make up financial wellness, like financial education. Financial education is just it's like you need to learn about this topic, and that kind of in what I would say Gen 2, where there are apps coming along that can kind of do things, help you manage your money better and everything like that. Education went to the wayside. I think that's coming back in vogue, if that's a thing in financial well-being. But I think there is such a broader understanding among organizations of all types that this is something that is strategic. It's not a nice to have, and there is genuine, earnest interest in making programs available. I think the opportunity or the challenges, opportunity and challenges, making sure that what's being provided is something that's going to move the needle versus just here's another technology that's going to solve, presumably solve one dimension of your life. People are multidimensional. We need to figure out how to address each dimension of those needs.
Well, Blake, thank you so much for coming in and talking to us. I've really enjoyed it, and I think our listeners will too. We're going to put some information in the show notes so people can reach out to you if they want to talk to you. But thank you for listening to Sustainable Investor Podcast. I've been Stuart Hall. See you next time.